Welcome back. This is another session of multiple choice skill development. It'll give you an opportunity to test your readiness for Part B of the diploma exam. What I'm going to do is use this time around the released items from 2011, and there's over 80, and I will only use the ones now applicable to the political systems unit. Political systems is, at least 40% of this diploma exam, so there should be lots for us to work with. What I'm going to do is, struggle through the questions with you, and then at the end, we'll take a peek at the answer key. I have two windows open. I have one window that I'll be looking at the sources, and I'll have a second window where I can look at the questions. So I do encourage you to do the same. Rather than having to scroll back and forth within one window, it's probably easiest just to have two windows open. And yeah, let's see what we can find out here. It's pretty exciting times. Pretty exciting times. So, looking at the first set, I know we didn't do this one when we looked at economics, so we can give it a go this time and see if we can deduce the answer. Looks like it could be a related one-issue question, but a good test-taking skill is always to look at the question first. The writer indicates that some scholars researching an issue are concerned that other scholars may be. This really presents itself as a reading comprehension question. It's using social studies as the backbone of the question, but at the same time, it's asking you to take a passage and to dissect it and to find an answer within the passage, and that really looks like an English language arts type of question. The writer indicates that some scholars researching an issue are concerned that other scholars may be altering history to suit an agenda. So what we can do is we can go back to the source, and if you don't want to remember all four at the same time, you can go back to the source 4 times and look for just that, or you can look for 4 at the same time. Now, if you have lots of time on the diploma, you might want to do it so that you're only looking for one thing at a time. I do like to distinguish between the 4 just so I can see the subtle differences. Is altering history to suit an agenda different than promoting racial and ethnic intolerance? I believe it is. So if it's stuck between these two, I think I'm going to pause. I'm going to say, what would that look like? Language-wise, what would that look like? Trying to discredit a country's democratic institutions. Again, this is distinctively different than that and that. Seeking to suppress intellectual debate on an important issue. So I might highlight key things like suppress debate, discredit democracy, promote intolerance, alter history. Let's go back and see what it is. The writer indicates some scholars researching an issue are concerned, other scholars may be. Some scholars have adamantly argued that a number of the founding fathers of the American government in the 18th century were significantly influenced by their observations and knowledge of the First Nations societies to which they have been exposed as members of early colonial American society. Now, I might pause after that first sentence and say, have I already seen the answer? Because it does say some scholars, and the question says, the writer indicates that some scholars, so there's a cue there, right? Researching an issue are concerned that some scholars have adamantly argued that a number of the founding fathers of the American government were significantly influenced. We're concerned that other scholars, well, it's not talking about other scholars here, it's talking about the founding fathers' influence. So maybe we need to keep going. These scholars contend that the democratic structures and civil liberties of the United States were developed by these men using their learning of First Nation societies to inform their creation of the foundation documents of the U.S. Other scholars dispute such claims. Okay, now we seem to be really getting into, a conflict between scholars. Other scholars dispute such claims, in some cases making the accusation that revisionist history, altering history, revisionist history, that revisionist history is being created to achieve political aims. Being achieved to create political aims, an agenda. It's a. So that's a reading comprehension, that's a matching, that's going back, reading for understanding, and trying to ultimately see this within the passage. And we did just that. If the source was being considered for use in a research project, I'm not a fan of these questions, they can be tough, it would be most appropriately used. So as a summation of the arguments of one side, to identify resources from which research information can be gathered. So what would B look like? It'd be a list of resources, like this book by this person kind of stuff, and I don't see any of that. As a primary document that can be quoted and cited. If it's a primary document, then who said it? How can I quote this if I don't know who said it? Maybe I could look at the back of the diploma to see who said it. That's always a good test-taking skill too. To establish the context for which exploration of an issue can be undertaken. Summation of the arguments of one side to establish the context for which exploration of an issue can be undertaken. These scholars argue that the constitutional foundation for the government of the United States was influenced almost exclusively by ideas that evolved in Western civilization from the time of ancient Greece through the Enlightenment period. Complicating the debate is the fact that none of the Founding Fathers or First Nations representatives can be questioned in an effort, so there are no primary people, to discover what role First Nations societies played or did not play in the creation of the government of the United States. So it really is getting the topic started, right? To establish the context for which the exploration of an issue could be undertaken. So this is the context of the issue, what influences were there on the foundation of the United States, and it really is just establishing the context. We're going to go with D on that one. Number 3 looks very political. I think we went through that when we did the political one. But we can take a peek again if you don't remember. Each of the people identified in the diagram promoted the idea that, so we have Locke, Montesquieu, Mill, and Smith. The power of the state over individuals should be limited. Well, they're all individualists, right? Am I wrong? Locke's an individualist. Smith is an economic individualist. Our freedom should be absolute unless they harm others. Montesquieu, checks and balances, power of the individual to hold some authority over government, keep government in check. Yeah, I mean, that seems pretty clear. Number 4 to 6. Here's another one that we can do with political. Good stuff. Canadian, oh, no, I almost messed up, didn't do my own rule. What's the question? The writer of Source 1 argues that courts in Canada are doing something, right? What are courts in Canada doing? So the argument is trying to make a point about courts in Canada. Or is it that courts in Canada are highly critical of politicians? Again, pause. What might that look like? They might talk about, scandals and how politicians lack morals and the courts are, trying them as criminals. So, I mean, that'd be a cool thing to read. Are dominated by liberal-minded judicial officials. A and B are 2 different writings. So, at the end of reading it, are they dominated by liberal-minded people? Or are they critical of politicians? Could they be both? Yes, they could be both, but they're 2 different things. C, make decisions that have widespread public support. D, make decisions that elected officials are reluctant to make. Wow. We got 2 here that say make decisions. I'm not saying that that's a cue or anything, but I'm going to be looking for, are they talking about making decisions or are they talking about the nature of the politicians? Canadian courts are now making decisions that politicians should have recognized and made years ago. Make decisions that elected officials are reluctant to make. It's in the first sentence. It's in the first sentence. The courts have shown leadership and responsibility where no political will or backbone exists in Parliament. And we're done. That was far too easy. The irony in source 2 derives from the expectation that in democratic states, so we haven't looked at source 2 yet, but let's look at the irony. So source 2, we have a cartoon, the legislative branch, and in fact, you have the House of Commons with, there's the Peace Tower. You have the House of Commons here, and in the background, you have the Supreme Court, and the House of Commons is just seen as like a facade. And in the reality is the Supreme Court's the legislative branch. So the cartoonist, D. Adler, is saying that there's a facade that the HFC is doing the legislation, but it's the Supreme Court that yields or wields the real legislative power. And we wouldn't expect to see this because this is the judicial branch, this is the legislative branch, and they're suggesting that it's actually the judicial branch that is performing the role of the legislative branch. So a neat cartoon. What was the question again? The irony into derives from the expectation that in democratic states, new legislation must be approved by the courts. Well, this isn't saying that the courts didn't approve it. This is saying that the courts had like a heavy hand in determining it. So I wouldn't say that's irony that new legislation must be approved. Something else happening here. Elected officials will not comment on rulings brought down by the courts. I don't see anybody, avoiding comment on things. Legislation will be created by people elected to office. These people are elected by the general public. These people are not. The cartoon is suggesting that it's really these people creating the laws. And the irony is that in a democracy, we expect these guys to do it. Seems like our answer. Appointees to the Supreme Court must be members of the governing political party. No, the irony is C. That's why there's the facade of the House of Commons and the actual structure of the Senate in the back. Number 6. For which of the following research questions would both sources be most appropriately used? So I'm going to go back, I'm going to think about that cartoon. Okay, I'm going to think about the quote about really the Supreme Court is making decisions politicians don't. To what extent should the judicial branch wield, hey man, they're using my word, legislative power. So let's see if it applies. Should the judicial branch wield legislative power? Here, that is the a theme of the cartoon. And here it's saying courts are now making decisions, wielding legislative power, that Parliament should have done and didn't do. Yeah, no, that sure sounds like the answer. I'm going to go through the other ones, make sure that they don't work, but my tendency is to go with A there, for sure. To what extent should international pressure influence? I don't see, especially in this cartoon here, where's international pressure? It's not drawn in there at all. To what extent should the media be free? I don't see the media in this cartoon anywhere. There's no role of media. To what extent should the right to free press be limited? Free press, media, one and of the same. There's nothing about a crisis situation here. I guess it was as easy as I thought. All right. Number 7 to number 11 looks like more political questions. The speaker in source 1. Yay, there's more than one source. I get to do lots of reading. The speaker in source 1 implies that political systems with an emphasis on public accountability. So we got to be careful, because at the end of the course you've seen the word public used many times in different ways. So you might get confused and see the word public and think of communism there. It's not saying communism, it's saying public accountability. It's not saying public property, so read it carefully. The speaker in source 1 implies that political systems with an emphasis on public accountability, so holding the government accountable in public, by the public, may lead to political decision-making that is elitist. Now I'm going to read it, but I want to think about them. So, we're going to hold the government accountable. Will that lead to elitism? If we don't hold the government accountable, I think it would lead to elitism. It would make lead to political decision making that is decisive. Well, if the government knows that they're going to be held accountable, are they going to be more reluctant to act sometimes? Bureaucratic. Irresponsible. Okay, we've got 4 different words. Now it's a matching game again. That's what this really becomes often. The role of government must be to lead and provide direction for a country. I might even write the words next to this, just so I know what I'm looking for. Elitist, decisive, bureaucratic, irresponsible, implies that with an emphasis on public accountability may lead to political decision making that is. Okay. This means that governments will invariably make decisions that will be unpopular, but nevertheless must be made. Okay? So far it's pro-government being a leader, right? So far the first couple of sentences are saying governments must lead, the leading doesn't have to be popular, sometimes what is necessary is not popular. Okay? When political leaders are continually held accountable to the masses, this is the question, public accountability, right? When political leaders are continually held accountable to the masses, they will do what appeases the masses, not necessarily what is right. The speaker implies that political systems with an emphasis on public accountability may lead to political decision making that is wrong, right? They're going to do what is popular, not what is right. The only word here that kind of looks like wrong might be irresponsible. Opinion poll results become more important than informed thought. So rather than acting on what is based on information, you act upon what is popular. The counsel of well-educated persons regarding an issue may be sought, but not heeded if their answers contradict what the masses desire. So if you don't heed those who actually know what you should be doing, it could be saying you're acting irresponsibly. The ideas of those whose only interest is doing what is necessary are less valued than are the ideas of those with first concern is self-interest. The consequences for countries guided for such a political system can be catastrophic because the politicians are acting irresponsibly. Here's a question for supporters of such systems. Would you send your country's army into the field of battle and allow strategic and tactical decisions to be made collectively? No, because that would be irresponsible. I am going to walk away from number 7. I'm going to put a little happy face here, and I'm going to say to myself, I don't need to check this over at the end of the diploma. I'm happy with it. If I was unsure, I'd put a little question mark, and I'd come back to it. But because I'm pretty sure about this one, I'm positive, it sure sounds irresponsible, I'm putting a happy face, I'm not coming back to it. The speaker in source 2, again, I haven't read source 2 yet because I didn't want to read both and then have to go back and say, okay, which was which. The speaker in source 2 argues that technological and social changes have done something. Let's go and take a peek. But before we take a peek, let's preload some things that we could be looking for. Speaker in 2 argues that technological and social changes, okay, I get what that means, have contributed to the downfall of totalitarian regimes. So technology led to the downfall of the USSR. Okay, I think that that's true. That could be an answer. Doesn't have to be, but could be. Allowed the creation of radical political movements. And I think that that could work too. A and B are different. Eliminated class systems based on economic factors. Yeah, I'd like to know where that happened because I'm unfamiliar with it happening. Assisted people in becoming politically well informed. Could technology help people get informed? Sure could. So is it technology helping people get informed? Is it technology making people more radical? Or is it technology destroying dictatorships? Now we're matching again. How easy is this? A government can only have legitimacy if it governs with the consent of the citizens. Now, another thing about doing these multiple choice, this should be helping you with your writing. These are great statements that you could be making in your own writing. Autocratic and oligarchic political systems are based on arrogance. An individual in the first system and an elite in the second hold the belief that one has a monopoly on wisdom and true knowledge. Haven't heard anything about technology yet. Whatever scant element of truth there may have been to this assumption in the distant past times have changed. In a modern age of universal public education, a free and diverse mass media technology, instantaneous global communication technology, and the liberty to speak and debate without fear of reprisal, there is a collective wisdom that exists and must be heeded. And this would be a great argument for you to put in a pro-democracy essay. Supporters of elitist regimes believe that the vast majority of people are short-sighted and self-serving and therefore ill-suited to influence decisions that have far-reaching consequences. Even if this belief could be proven true, what not those same human traits exist in authoritarian leaders? Was Stalin's decision to eliminate many of his best generals, who he perceived to be a threat to his power, short-sighted? Is Robert Mugabe's first concern the good of Zimbabwe or the good of Robert Mugabe? Just as accountability to consumers is what ensures that businesses remain innovative, efficient, and responsible, public accountability will ensure that political leaders demonstrate similar traits. Public accountability, because of the media, we can now hold the government accountable, and therefore they can't be tyrants and stuff. Well, let's go see if we can rule some out. Contributed to the downfall of totalitarian regimes. Well, we can infer that they would argue that it would help. That is a maybe. Allowed the creation of radical political movements. There's no suggestion of people are radicalized by technology in this. Eliminated class conflicts, class systems. They don't really mention this. You know, it hasn't led to a redistribution of economic power. It talks about political power. Assisted people in becoming politically well informed. Let's go back and look for, is there a line that really says it's D? Or is there a line that really says it's A? Is there a line that says because of technology and social changes, people are more informed? Or because of that, totalitarian regimes fall? So we're reading through it and looking for those two things. In a modern age of universal public education, a free and diverse mass media, instantaneous global communication, and the liberty to speak, social changes. And the liberty to speak and debate without fear of reprisal, social changes. Okay? There's a collective wisdom that exists and must be heeded. So because of social changes, because of technology, individuals now have a collective wisdom. Because of that, we're more informed. I see that. Supporters of elite regimes believe, in the vast majority of people, are short-sighted, self-serving, ill-suited. Even in this belief could be proven true. Would not these same things be said to be of Stalin, of Mugabe? It's not saying that Stalin and Mugabe were defeated because people are informed. It's saying that people are informed because of the technology. So I'm going to go with D. But I bet many people in the province were stuck between these two. Is the main focus that because of this technology, the USSR fell? Is the main focus of the article because of the technology Mugabe fell? Or is the main focus because of the technology people are now informed? The main focus is that, and that's why it's D. Number 9. With which of the following statements would both speakers most likely agree? It's been a while. I can't even really remember that first one. I'm going to go back and just take a peek and remind myself what that one was. So, first one, this one's pro, more of an authoritarian government. This one was saying, we don't want somebody just doing what's popular. We need someone doing what's necessary. Yeah, I remember it now. So they disagree with each other, right? The first one is more pro-authoritarianism, and the second one's more pro-individualism, more pro-democracy. But what would they agree on? Human nature drives most people to embrace collectivist values. That second one sure didn't seem like that. Government's sole purpose is to enhance liberty. The first one sure didn't seem like that. Political decisions must be made with consideration as to what most benefits the country. That is just broad enough that they both would agree. Now, they disagree on how that's going to be. The first one would say that that means a dictatorship. The second one might say that means a democracy. But they both agree that political decisions must be made with consideration as to what most benefits the country. And that's how that umbrella is big enough to fit both of them under. It's going to be that. Number 10. In an effort to influence the opinions of their audience, both speakers acknowledge that there is no correct perspective. I didn't really get the impression from that first one that they were, hey, you like democracy and that's cool too. Use illustrative examples to challenge assumptions. I don't remember. I'm going to have to go back and look. Did they use illustrative examples? Here, they used the battlefield thing. Here, they talk about Mugabe. Illustrative examples to overcome assumptions. Check. What issue is most directly addressed by these speakers? Should political leaders interfere in decisions made by military guys? Well, they don't both directly talk about the military. To what extent should governments control the flow of information? To what extent should government decision policy reflect the will of the people? Now, I'm looking at that flow of information. There's some connection to technology in the second one, but I mean, there's polls being referenced in the first one, but there's not really a lot of talk about media and stuff. But they definitely both talk about, should the government do the will of the people? First one saying no, second one saying yes. I'm going to go with that. Wow, that took forever. But that's okay. It's good to go through these slowly. Pretty sure we did this one during the last test, but we can do it again. So the anarchist political ideology, anarchy says, I don't want a government, so they'd be there. The concept of the divine right of kings, we like lots of government. Enlightenment thinkers, we said probably over here, more freedom than control. And monarchists during the French Revolution. Well, are they absolute monarchists or are they constitutional monarchists? I wish they would have clarified, but they don't clarify, so they probably don't want to see the king killed. I'm going to go with this is before the execution of the king, probably early on, and I'll go there. But if they had put constitutional monarchist, that would have been a better one, and we might have been stuck with B. All right. We definitely did that one before, definitely did that. Now we're going to be in a role of economics in a role, right? So lots of economics. Are you getting nauseous yet? That's the Cold War. We'll have to wait for that. Machiavelli. I think we can do a little Machiavelli. Nobody ever watches these. I can sing all I want. Machiavelli's advice would be embraced most readily by leaders who are probably authoritarian if it's his quote about the ends justifying the means. The question whether it is to be loved rather than feared, or rather feared rather than loved, it might perhaps be answered that we would wish to be both, but since love and fear can hardly exist together, unless I fear how much I love you. Yeah, it's The Office. Look it up. If we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. So who wants to be feared? Probably the authoritarian. Boom, too easy. The appeal of Machiavelli's advice is based on the fact that the advice is deemed useful to both communist radicals and fascist reactionaries. So, sped things up, went through that one quickly. We've got a propaganda poster. Is this one going to be about propaganda? I think we might be able to wrestle with this. I don't think it's Cold War stuff. Taken together, these posters demonstrate that when in time of crisis, democratic and non-democratic countries will attempt to. So we have a propaganda poster from America. War bonds are cheaper than wooden crosses, so we got to support the war. And we got this tractor thing going on here. A tractor in the field is worth a tank in battle by the Soviets, our allies, also in that same war. So we got two World War II propaganda posters trying to mobilize the masses to help the war effort. Taken together, these posters demonstrate that when in time of crisis, World War II, democratic, the United States, non-democratic, the Soviet Union, will attempt to ration vital supplies. Makes sense. Did I see that, though? Do I see anything about rationing here? Do you see anything about rationing? No. Invoke laws to restrict. Are they talking about, hey, you cannot go there, freedom of motion gone? Are they talking about, shut up, you don't have freedom of speech? No, there's other propaganda posters for that, and they didn't show those. So it's not that. Focus the energies of citizens on sustaining the war effort. I even said that before I looked at the answers. Come on, people. This is far too easy. Use propaganda campaigns to gain international sympathy. Are they targeting people outside the US? Are they targeting people outside the Soviet Union? No, so it can't be D. Who picked D? The posters support the generalization that in times of war, both authoritarian... This almost reads just like the other question. I had to pause for a second. I thought I just did this one. Both authoritarian and democratic governments will require civilians to accept restrictions, identify scapegoats, attempt to ensure public support for state goals. This really seems like the same question and it has the same answer. C was the answer to the other one. Focus the energies of citizens on the war effort. What is the war effort? The state goal. Attempt to ensure public support for the state goal. C is your answer. You put both of these on the same test? Testing the same thing. Oh well. Oh well. Yeah. This looks like we could look at this. Information reinforces the fact that one reason people in Europe did not resist Nazi actions against Jewish citizens was that most people hoped to advance within the Nazi party, were concerned for their own personal safety. A and B are different. I've distinguished them. When I look and I match, because these are all matching it seems, we're matching different things. Expected the political situation to be temporary. Okay, that's different. Assume Jews would not be, should be assume Jewish people. Assume the Jewish people would not be subject to extreme cruelty. All right. So I'm going to think about the options. All right. I think I know the differences here. Okay, now we're just reading, seeing what pops up. The real fear was of denunciation. So if you know what denunciation means, you might know the answer. Real fear is denunciation. Suppose you would try to hide a Jewish person. In our city, it was not safe. Someone would denounce you. So this I hold up as a crime, as a collective crime. Our people were still too anti-Semitic, and even the best, even those who had close Jewish friendships and relationships, were not strong enough to buckle this. And they were not prepared to act. The nice, the good people on whom their Jewish friends could have counted were the most scared, the most weak, the least prepared to take on this huge, brutal machinery which exploded all around them. We were just not ready. It's not talking about that they wanted to become great Nazis. It's not saying that they expected the Jewish people to not have extreme cruelty, saying that they feared denunciation, they feared their own safety, they feared that it was not safe. In our city, it was not safe to hide a Jewish person. There's your answer. The speaker believes that he and his fellow non-Jewish citizens were guilty of an offense against a group of people rendered powerless. He said it was a collective crime, right? So this I hold up as a crime, as a collective crime. A crime against who? The Jewish people that were rendered powerless. A. For the purposes of historical research into the Holocaust, this document would be considered a primary resource. Because, why is it a primary resource? Well, you got somebody talking, right? It's a recollection of a person who lived and experienced. So this is a direct story of someone there. It's a primary document. It's not a secondary. I heard from a friend that this happened. This is what happened from someone that was there. It's a primary resource because this person was, boots on the ground. So B is the answer. Economics. I think that we as Quebecers have now reached the point of no return. I am deeply concerned that we can manage on our own. The referendum will be the test. I sincerely hope that in this process of the emergence of a new country, we can keep with our closest neighbors the confidence, the good faith, and the common interest that history, geography, and economics have bestowed upon us by Jacques Parizeau, 1977. It's good speech. I forgot to read the question. I was so into the speech. Number 39. A supporter of the principles of liberalism, so democracy, someone who likes democracy, someone who likes freedoms, would view the comments made by Jacques Parizeau as acceptable or unacceptable. And why? Seems to be a recurring way to format questions. Acceptable because the people of Quebec will have the opportunity to present their opinions through a democratic process. Would somebody who likes liberalism like it that people get to vote on something? Yes. Now, is that what's being made? A referendum? Yes. Oh man, I think I got it. 40 to 44. Political practices. So, read the description of an action, then select the political practice that best exemplifies it. A choice may be used more than once. So, 89, Tiananmen Square, killing many people. Is that scapegoatism? State-sponsored force to eliminate dissent. Employing indoctrination. Controlling citizen participation. The image of a collective egalitarian decision-making. So picture Tiananmen Square. Picture, the videos that you watched, the links that I gave you. They use tanks to stop people from questioning the state. State-sponsored terror or force to eliminate dissent. It's a big yes. I'm putting a happy face next to that. I'm not reviewing that one. In 2008, Mugabe denounced, there's that word again, Great Britain, the former colonial power that controlled the territory that is now Zimbabwe, as being the source of the severe economic and social troubles plaguing Zimbabwe. So at first it said election campaign, and I was all like, whoa, election campaign? I don't got to read this anymore. It's D. But I kept reading, and the thing about denouncing Britain that controlled the territory, saying that they're the source of everything, that's just him using Britain as a scapegoat, is it not? So now I'm like, whoa, dude, which one is it? Is it the scapegoat thing? Well, it's all, what is he actually doing in it? He's denouncing Britain. It happened during an election, but the focus isn't the election. The focus is that he's denouncing and saying all of our problems were because of the British. Let's blame the British for everything. If they had not walked so proudly upon this earth, we'd all be so much better. I'm Irish. You don't have to convince me. Yeah, it sure sounds like it's the British are bad. The British are bad. Um, in the Soviet Union, national elections were held on a regular basis with high rates of voter turnout. Political parties consistently approved the candidates. That's the controlled participation one. In Burma, monks and other groups opposed to autocratic rule by a military junta have frequently been subject to arrest, imprisonment, and beatings. Okay, so they're opposed, they're being arrested, so they're a voice of dissent, and they have force and terror coming their way. Sure seems like that B one again. In the 1930s, the Nazi government ensured that the vast majority of youth, that's indoctrination. Anytime you got the youth. Nazi youth, Hitler youth, schools, curriculum, that's way too easy. Now we got some philosophers, Mill, Hobbes, Rousseau, and Burke to match up. We should act so as to promote the greatest happy for the greatest number of good. That sure sounds like utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a part of John Stuart Mill. French Revolution was not a movement towards a representative and constitutional government, but rather a destruction of tradition and poor. That sure sounds like Burke. He hated the French Revolution. In fact, that's like a quote that we use directly for him. You know, the betrayal of the great chain of being. The people should make laws directly. Was there a Locke or something? That's probably Rousseau. Government by a strong leader, Hobbes. Now, why do they put some questions so easy on there? That's why you need your cast of characters, because then it made it easy. All right. Man, tests are long. 49 to 50. I think this is a political question. 49. For which of the following essay topics would the information in the excerpt be most appropriately used? To what extent should the government of Canada restrict extremist political movements? Should fundamental rights and freedoms be suspended during crisis? Should political representation be based upon... well, this one's totally different than these two. To what extent has the government of Canada promoted collective rights? So these two are... there's some overlap there, so I'm going to struggle if it's one of those two. But I'm kind of picturing the four of them in my head. Let's read. As Aboriginal peoples, we often confront laws which are not of our making and often do not respect our values and priorities. We confront laws which have served the interests of those who wish to dispossess us of our lands and resources, and often succeeded in doing so. But we Aboriginal peoples, who have all the reason in the world to feel cheated and ill-treated, have never nurtured a collective desire for retribution. We have never said Europeans go home. We recognize that we all live together in this land, that we must share, and that in the end our interests are much the same. We want peace, health, and well-being for our children. We strive for clean water and air and happiness and freedom. We insist our mutual recognition and respect for dignity and fundamental rights and the principle of equality of peoples. Wow, I think the answer might have been there. And in spite of everything, we are not attempting to succeed or to overturn the established order. We would like to be treated fairly and equitably in general partnership and with friendship. We insist on mutual, and I can't pronounce that word, I'm sorry, recognition and respect for dignity, fundamental rights, and the principle of equality of peoples. I'm seeing, to what extent has government promoted collective rights for the Aboriginal peoples? That's what I'm seeing there. And the next one's on this one too. Perspective promoted would be most acceptable to someone who's a supporter of self-motivation, collective interest, the collective interest of the Indigenous people, armed confrontation, he's saying no, succession movements, he's saying no, he says no to those things. He's talking about a group, he's talking about this is what's in the interest of his people. We're going to go collective interest. We're going to go collective interest. We've got some Soviet stuff going on. I think we talked about these ones before with the economic unit, but if not, we might as well look at them quickly. The common feature among the economic programs, yeah, we totally did these in the economic one. 53, 54, holy smokes, let's just give me an essay to read. Okay, why am I reading it? Well, because I want to get the questions right. The writer of this source suggests that one consequence of a crisis. Are these political? Yeah. One consequence of a crisis is that tensions will rise between democratic and authoritarian countries. What would that look like? Okay. Popularity, opposition, political parties among the voting will decline. Okay, those two things look differently. Okay, tension between democracy and authoritarian, A. B, popularity of opposition parties will decline. Decisions will be made as to what powers the state must employ to restore stability. Citizens will develop a greater appreciation. In democratic states, it is relatively easy to afford every person his or her full array of civil liberties when times are good, troubles few, and stability is the order of the day. Most democratic states have constitutional law obliging the states to ensure the protection of liberties. The situation gets much more difficult, however, when conditions are no longer ideal. Okay. During a time of crisis, such as, don't say it, an onset of a pandemic or an attack by terrorists, democratic states face the potential of a divisive public debate. The issue is straightforward and can be summed up thus. To what extent should the rights of individuals be restricted during a time of crisis? The answer is far less straightforward. What constitutes a crisis? What sacrifices can or should be made? Are there certain freedoms that are so essential that can never be compromised? If liberties are compromised now, what assurance is there that they will be restored later? A lot of this sounds like what you should be doing in your intro to essays, by the way. One problem with this great public debate is that while it is held, time is lost so that the speed at which the state can respond to the crisis is slowed. People may resist an action. The courts may strike down an emergency decree. A politician may be reluctant to act for fear of public reprisal when the crisis ends. There's another paragraph. It is in the situations of crisis where authoritarian states display their great advantage over democratic states. There is no need for allowance for debate. People have limited rights at all times, and since the state employs many agencies of repression, an authoritarian state can respond swiftly and decisively to the crisis without need to heed the need to heed public sentiment. Through their control of thought and speech, authoritarian states can ensure that there is minimal dissent towards whatever measures are taken. I don't even remember what day of the week it is, so I'm going to have to go back to the questions. That was a lot to read. Now, that would look brilliant in an essay. There's some stuff you can borrow there for your essays, for the division of society in terms of how to respond to crisis politically. I would borrow a ton of that for my writing. The writer of this source suggests that one consequence of a crisis situation is that tensions will rise between governments? No, it didn't talk about that. Popularity of minority groups, like official political parties, will decline. Didn't talk about that. Hey, I got a 50% chance. Citizens of a country will develop a greater appreciation. Or decisions must be made as to what powers the state must employ. Well, it seems like they were talking about dictatorships can do this better than non-dictatorships. What freedoms must people have? What powers must the state have? I'm gonna go with C on that one. Don't make me read it again. As a resource for a research report on the ways countries may respond to a crisis, this source would be characterized as. I don't like these questions. I struggle on them. A comprehensive analysis of factors leading up to a crisis. It's more talking about after the crisis, right? A generalized discussion of government actions during times of crisis. Yeah, what should the government do? I can see that. An editorial commentary on the dangers of public apathy. Didn't talk about apathy. Pro-authoritarian commentary was pretty pro-authoritarian on crisis management. Did talk about that. Supported by historical evidence. Was there historical evidence? If so, it's D. If not, it's B. I see no historical evidence. Tricky, tricky. There's none of this. So, I mean, it's this, but it's not that. So it's got to be that. Tricky, tricky. Okay, enough of that. Let's go to the next set. Whew! Some numbers. Nice little break from reading tons of stuff. Okay, I get it. It's going to be looking at electoral systems. These election results indicate that when the percentage of popular vote is considered, the most underrepresented political party was. So this is a simple math question. You know, number of seats, percentage of popular vote, number of seats, percentage of popular vote. So, I mean, we got to do some math, right? So they get 5 seats out of 58. So they get, what, about 8-9%, and they had 17.9% of the vote. So that's not too cool. These guys get about twice as many seats, and they had about twice as many vote. So, I mean, these both got disadvantaged here. These guys had like almost all the seats, and they had half the votes. The NDP were the ones that were overemphasized here. Here you've got the NDP still getting a big chunk, and the Saskatchewan party getting a big chunk. Here you got these guys, the Liberals. They had 20% of the vote, only 4 seats. The Liberals were disadvantaged. Let's go with Liberals. Liberal Party in 1999. It even has a year. So yeah, these dudes in 1999, they were very disadvantaged. That's my answer. Liberal Party in 99. 99. Which of the following statements most directly, it's going to be something, the decline in the Liberal Party between 95 and 99 can be attributed to the rise of the Saskatchewan Party. They did decline. The Saskatchewan Party did go up, but so did these guys decline. These guys declined more. So, I mean, there is a pull to that. The Saskatchewan Party support was made exclusively, the word exclusively is a pretty big word, from disaffected NDP. Well, no, because that would only be like 9%, and the Saskatchewan Party had 39%. Changes in election results occurred because of redrawn. We don't know that there's been redrawn constituencies. We know that there's the same number of constituencies. Changes in election were due to reformed system. It's still the same system. It's not PR. It's first past post. The only thing we can say is that some of these dudes went there. So there's your answer. A. I need like this is where like on a diploma exam I'd have like a snack break or something. Like bring a granola bar. Maybe not something too crunchy that would wake people up. I don't know. People are gonna need breaks because you get fatigued. There's a fatigue happening right now. The fatigue is setting in. The founders of the United States established a republican form of government with a system of checks and balances and separation of power in an effort to ensure that no one person or branch, I mean, it just jumped out at me. It's got to be that. Historically, both socialists and that was an economic question. Are we done with the sources? Oh man, that's awesome. So this is an economic question. Which common practice in democratic states best reflects the value of collectivism? Labor unions, new laws. Well, it says democratic states, right? New laws come into effect when signed by the head of state? Well, wait, what? In democratic states, I don't know how that's collectivism. I'm sorry. The head of state in the United States is an elected individual based upon a free election. That's individualism, not collectivism. So the media is free to criticize. That's not collectivism. The beliefs of political party leaders are a major consideration for voters. Labor unions advocate better working conditions. Yeah, better working conditions for labor is a collective thing. Group common, like collective responsibility, common good, common practice in democratic states, labor unions, democratic states. That's a weird connection. But yeah, I guess it's A. A critic of the Canadian parliamentary system would most likely argue that democratic principles are threatened by the ability of the Prime Minister to. Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about this in the lesson about the appointing thing, right? Hold office for an unlimited number of terms. Now, that too, it sounds horrible, but if you are elected by the people, you still got to be elected, right? So that's still the will of the people. Whereas appointing people, he can appoint whomever he or she wants. So no. Repress, well, that's an ugly thing too. Set the agenda, but most ugly would be A, in terms of challenging democratic principles of checks and balances. This just in, I need to speed up, is what the mic in my ear just said. Now you're looking and saying there's no mic in your ear, and you're right. Which of the following statements most accurately explains the great man theory? Leaders will arise when there is need. Males have tended to. Males? No. Democratic as opposed to dictatorial leaders have been ignored. Females have never. What? You guys put that on a diploma? Great man is great person, great individual, not great man is male. So there are great women that have been great man, like Joan of Arc. So A, I guess. Like the other ones are just sexist, and that's not going to be the answer. They wouldn't even put that kind of crap on the diploma now. Which of the following individuals or which of the following ideologies is most similar to social Darwinism? Oh, we already did this one, right? Laissez-faire, survival of the fittest. Human rights legislation, such as the UN Declaration of Human Rights, demonstrates international efforts to promote civil liberties, right? From the perspective of an internationalist, UN military action response to ethnic and civil unrest is, well, probably acceptable because you're saving stuff. Moral obligation, sure, right? Like it doesn't have anything to do with economic growth. Effectiveness of there's a lot of UN here, have been questioned most strongly by the proponents of national sovereignty. We study all this in 30 because the UN. So the UN is not effective because members within the UN still promote nationalism over internationalism. Okay, I agree. The effectiveness of the UN has been questioned most strongly by proponents of national sovereignty. Effectiveness of the UN has been questioned most strongly by proponents of that. So they're saying UN doesn't work. I'd rather be like, this is Trump's position, right? Let's pull out of WHO. Let's basically go back to isolationism. This is tough because you could say that in 2020, see, if you see the work of the World Trade Organization as a organization within the umbrella of the UN, then A is not the answer. But if you see the WTO and all of the other work in terms of global trade as outside the umbrella of the UN, then A is your answer. The unfortunate thing is that is within the umbrella of the UN, but most people don't associate it. World trade does have, the UN does have, its tentacles all over world trade, governing it, setting laws and stuff like that. So people might jump to A, but they're involved there. I'm going to go with C. Leadership and power is rooted in Cold War geopolitics. That countries outside of those with power during the Cold War may say UN doesn't work anymore because it's a stale institution. Like India looks at the UN and says, we've got almost 1.4 billion people. Why don't we have a permanent seat on the Security Council? And we don't, because the way the UN was created was to reflect the time of 1945 of its creation, where India was still, very much a puppet of the UK. That's a unit we haven't done yet. Which of the following scenarios would a political science likely cite as the primary cause for decline in the percentage of eligible voters casting their ballots in Canadian elections? Economic, universal, apathy. Why wouldn't it be apathy? Decline is apathy. Historically, the provision that's economic, that's Cold War, economic, Cold War, economic, Cold War, economic, Cold War, and we're done. All right, so I'm going to sneeze off camera, so I'm going to end this, but there's the answers. Hopefully we did okay. Otherwise, I'm a complete idiot, and you shouldn't watch these then. Have a good day. I'll say see you next time, but that's it. Those are all of the questions for politics. Next time we'll be talking Cold War in the contemporary world. So hopefully I'm wearing a different shirt, because that's going to be a different day.